Good day, viewers. As the war between Russia and Ukraine is now entering its second month, let's take a quick look at how the Soviet Union was formed and what led to its collapse on December 25th, 1991. So let's get started. The Soviet Union, officially the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic or USSR, was the successor to the Russian Empire. Following the Russian Revolution of 1917, four socialist republics were established on the territory of former Russian Empire: the Russian Soviet Federated Socialist Republic, the Transcaucasian Soviet Federated Socialist Republic, the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. These four constituent republics established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic or USSR on December 30th, 1922, to which other republics were subsequently added. A power struggle broke out in newly formed USSR in 1924 with the death of communist leader Vladimir Lenin and ended in 1927 when Joseph Stalin gained victory. After the Second World War, with their respective allies, the USSR and the US engaged in Cold War. In late 1940s, the USSR helped to establish communist regimes throughout most of the Eastern Europe. The USSR exploded its first atomic bomb in 1949 and its first hydrogen bomb in 1953 to compete with US in its arms race. Following Stalin's death, it experienced limited political and cultural liberalization under his successor Nikita Khrushchev. It launched its first manned orbital spaceflight in 1961. It consisted in its final year of 15 Soviet Socialist republics that gained independence at its dissolutions, which are present-day Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Russia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. USSR consisted of 11 time zones and had common boundaries with 6 European countries and 6 Asian countries. Now fast forwarding to the era between 1988 and 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed under its final president Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, the dissolution of the Soviet Union was the process of internal political, economic, and ethnic disintegration within the Soviet Union, which resulted in the end of its existence as a sovereign state. It was an unintended result of General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev's effort to reform the Soviet political and economic system. In late 1991, the leader of three of the Union's founding largest republics, the Russian SFSR, the Ukrainian SSR, and the Belarusian SSR, declared that the Soviet Union no longer existed, and 8 more republics joined them shortly thereafter. Gorbachev had to resign his office as president and what was left of the parliament to formally acknowledge the Union's collapse. Now, if you ask anyone, why did the Soviet Union collapse, you would get different answers depending upon whom you ask. Throughout its history, the Soviet Union's economy depended on a system under which the central government, referred to as the Politburo, controlled all the sources of industrial and agricultural production. From the 1920s to the end of the Second World War, the 5-year plans of Joseph Stalin placed the production of capital goods like military hardware over the production of the consumer goods. In the old economic argument of guns or butter, Stalin chose guns. Based on its world leadership in petroleum production, the Soviet economy remained strong until the German invasion of Moscow in 1941. By 1942, the Soviet gross domestic product, or GDP, had plummeted by 34%. Crippling the nation's industrial output and retarding its overall economy until the 1960s. In 1964, the new Soviet president, Leonid Brezhnev, allowed industries to emphasize profit over production. By 1970s, the Soviet economy reached its high point, with GDP estimated about 60% to that of the United States. In 1979, however, the costs of Afghanistan war took the wind out of the Soviet economy's sails. By the time the USSR withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, its $2,500 billion GDP had just dropped to 50% of the United States' $4,862 billion. Even more telling was the per capita income in the USSR, which was $8,700 compared to $19,700 in the United States at that time. Despite Brezhnev's reform, the Politburo refused to increase the production of consumer goods. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, average Soviets stood in breadlines as Communist Party leaders collected even greater wealth. Witnessing the economic hypocrisy, many young Soviets refused to buy into the old-line communist ideology. As poverty weakened the argument behind the Soviet system, the people demanded reforms, and reform they would soon get from their future president Mikhail Gorbachev. In 1985, the Soviet Union's last leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, came to power ready to launch two sweeping policies of reform: perestroika and glasnost. Under perestroika, the Soviet Union would adopt a mixed communist capitalist economic system similar to that of modern-day China. While the government still planned the direction of the economy, the Politburo allowed free market forces like supply and demand to dictate some decisions on how much of what should be produced. Along with the economic reform, Gorbachev's perestroika was intended to draw new, younger voices into the elite circle of Communist Party, eventually resulting in the free democratic election of the Soviet government. However, while the post-perestroika elections offered voters a choice of candidates, including for the first time non-communists, the Communist Party continued to dominate the political system. Glasnost was intended to remove some of the decade-old limitation on the daily lives of the Soviet people. Freedom of speech, the press, and religions were restored, and hundreds of former political dissidents were released from prison. In essence, Gorbachev's glasnost policy promised the Soviet people a voice and the freedom to express it, which they would soon do. Unforeseen by Gorbachev and the Communist Party, perestroika and glasnost did more to cause the fall of the Soviet Union than they did to prevent it. Thanks to perestroika's economic drift towards Western capitalism, coupled with glasnost's apparent loosening of political restrictions, the government that Soviet people once feared suddenly appeared vulnerable to them. Seizing on people's new power to organize and speak out against the government, they began to demand the total end of Soviets' rule. Let's see what Gorbachev had to say about this collapse of the Soviet news in his interview to BBC News in 2016.
Не хотел ни в одном, ни в другом случае, чтобы мы не схлопотали гражданскую войну. А все было на мази. Вы представляете, если бы раскол и борьба за власть в стране такой, как наша, перенасыщенной оружием, включая и ядерное, это значит, что Горбачев для того, чтобы удержаться у власти, пошел на вот это все. Людей бы сколько угробили, разрушений, все. Нет, это не мог допустить. И моя победа состоит в том, что я покинул власть.
Now that was not all, viewers. The third reason for the collapse of the Union was the Chernobyl disaster. The Soviet people learned the realities of glasnost in the aftermath of the explosion of a nuclear reactor at the Chernobyl power station in Pripyat, now in Ukraine. On April 26, 1986, the explosion and fire spread more than 400 times the amount of radioactive fallout as the Hiroshima atomic bomb over much of the Western USSR and other Eastern European countries. Instead of immediately and openly informing the general public of the explosion, as promised under the glasnost, Communist Party's officials suppressed all information about the disaster and its danger to the general public. Despite the risk of radiation exposure, May Day parades were still held as planned. Not until May 14, which is 18 days after the disaster, did Gorbachev issue his first official public statement in which he called Chernobyl a misfortune and slammed Western media reports as highly immoral campaign of malicious lies. However, as the people in the fallout zone and beyond reported suffering from the effect of radiation poisoning, the falsehood of the Communist Party propaganda was exposed. As a result, public trust in the government and glasnost were shattered. Decades later, Gorbachev would call Chernobyl perhaps the real cause of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev believed the health of the Soviet economy depended on building better relationships with the West, in particular the United States. To placate US President Reagan, who in 1983 had called the USSR an evil empire, while ordering massive US military buildup in Eastern Europe, Gorbachev promised in 1986 to get out of the nuclear arms race and to withdraw Soviet troops from Afghanistan. Later the same year, he drastically reduced Soviet troop strength in the Warsaw Pact nations. During 1989, Gorbachev's new policy of military non-intervention caused the Soviet alliance in Eastern Europe to, in his word, crumble like a dry saltine cracker in just a few months. In Poland, the anti-communist trade unionist Solidarity movement succeeded in forcing the communist government to grant the Polish people the right to free and fair elections. Since 1961, the heavily guarded Berlin Wall had divided Germany into Soviet communist-ruled East Germany and democratic West Germany. Speaking in West Germany on June 12, 1987, the then US President Ronald Reagan famously called on Soviet leader Gorbachev to tear down that wall. By this time, the Reagan's anti-communist doctrine policy had weakened Soviet influence in Eastern Europe, and talks of German reunification had already begun.
And now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state, or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
In October 1989, East Germany's communist leadership was forced from power, and on November 9, 1989, the new East German government did indeed tear down that wall. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, the Berlin Wall ceased to function as a political barrier. By October 1990, Germany was fully reunified, signaling the coming collapse of the Soviet Union and other communist Eastern European regimes. The economic liberalization of perestroika and political chaos of glasnost severely reduced military funding and strength. Between 1985 and 1991, the residual troop strength of the Soviet military fell from over 5.3 million to fewer than 2.7 million. The first major reduction came in 1988 when Gorbachev responded to long-stalled arms reduction treaty negotiated by drawing down its military by 500,000 men, a 10% reduction. Another reason for the troop decline was the widespread resistance to the Soviet military draft that arose when the new freedom of glasnost allowed conscripted soldiers to speak publicly about the abusive treatment that they suffered. Between 1989 and 1991, the now weakened Soviet military was unable to suppress anti-Soviet separatist movements of the Republic of Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Lithuania. Finally, in August 1991, the Communist Party hardliners, who had opposed the perestroika and glasnost in the first place, led a military in an attempt to overthrow Gorbachev. However, 3 days August coup against the last attempts by the hardline communists to save the Soviet empire failed when the now fragmented military sided with Gorbachev. Though Gorbachev remained in office, the coup further destabilized the USSR, thus contributing its final dissolution on December 25, 1991. Now, blame for the collapse of the Soviet Union is often placed on the policies of Mikhail Gorbachev, but it is believed by some people it was his predecessor Leonid Brezhnev who wasted the nation's massive profit from a 20-year-old oil boom on an unwinnable arms race against the United States. It's surprising that the fall of such a big and mega empire happened in just years after Gorbachev assumed office. We are also frequently sharing updates on the present Ukrainian-Russian conflict in our What's Happening Today series. I hope that you find this video helpful and informational. If you like this video, hit like. And to continue hearing about topics like these, consider subscribing. If you never want to miss an update whenever we post something new, hit that bell icon. If you have any comments or any suggestions, please let us know in the comment sections below. Thank you.